This is your first lecture on the Spanish-American War, and we're going to be looking at the long and short-term causes of it, and then talk about how it, more importantly, how it impacts U.S. foreign policy. So some long-term reasons that we talked about in the WebQuest. One was industrialization. So this is at the same time as the Gilded Age is going on. America is industrializing, booming economically, so they need new markets and they need resources to build a lot of the goods that they're producing. So things like rubber, for example, access to mineral resources. A second one in the upper right-hand corner, you can see a picture of a Navy. Alfred T. Mahan was an advisor to many presidents, and he wrote a book in the early 90s that influenced a lot of them, as well as being an advisor, that was about how America needed to expand its naval power. He, looking at other imperial powers like England, Russia, etc., was seeing that a lot of their military might came from the expansion of their navy abroad. America was not present abroad very much with the Navy. And so he was saying that America really needed to expand that, needed to gain control of other territories where we could place our naval bases there for refueling, and again, to expand our sphere of influence militarily. Next is jingoism. Jingoism is just the feeling that your country, your culture, your religion is superior to another country. This is kind of an extension of manifest destiny that Americans or Anglo-Saxon Americans believed, that their religion, their belief was superior to other countries like Hawaiians, for example, or Puerto Ricans or Filipinos, that they believed that America coming in and controlling these countries to a certain degree would bring them the benefits of democracy and bring them the benefits of American culture. Again, looking at these people as backwards and uncivilized that needed the help of America to become civilized. And then finally, Cuba had tried to declare independence against Spain. Cubans were not happy with Spanish control of their island. There were rebels. Those rebels were getting thrown into concentration camps, if you remember, civilians, up to 200,000 of them. They were being oppressed. They were not happy. And that resonated with Americans who had once been colonized themselves by the English and declared independence. And so that storyline, again, resonated with Americans, making some Americans feel like we should help them in a quest for independence. But some of those feelings were not strong enough to push President McKinley to go to war until some of the more short-term reasons. So short-term on the right, we have the Delome letter. The minister Delome, the foreign minister Delome of Spain, so kind of like their Secretary of State, had written to was supposed to write to a Spanish official in Cuba. It was intercepted by the rebels and handed over to the Americans. Essentially, this letter kind of belittles McKinley, makes fun of him, says he's not going to do anything, kind of calls him powerless. And so this obviously doesn't make McKinley feel much better about the Spanish. On top of that, you have the newspapers kind of fueling this jingoistic fire, calling for war, pushing for war. Violence sells the news, and they exaggerate a lot of the facts. And that yellow journalism is that exaggeration of facts to push people to have kind of an emotional response to the news, and frequently used to get them to call for war and push for war. And that final spark is the explosion of the USS Maine. So it's a U.S. battleship that is in Havana. 266 Americans, civilian and soldiers, die in that explosion. At the time, it was not clear how it had exploded. McKinley and the newspapers rushed to conclusion and blamed the Spanish for not protecting the ship, blame a mine that was maybe placed by the Spanish or the Cubans. Ultimately, evidence today says it exploded because their ammunition was stored very close to coal burners, and so it was just an accident. But at the time, there was a rush to blame the Spanish and then use this explosion as an excuse to go to war, as you explored in your WebQuest. The American strategy, once McKinley asked from Congress for the declaration of war and got it, was twofold. One was to go kind of draw the Spanish Navy, which was not strong, away and focus on the Philippines first, and then later attack Cuba once kind of Spain was distracted by the Philippines. So again, the strategy was to focus on the Philippines. We also got the resident local Filipino people to rise up against Spain, saying that we would back them up with our Navy. That culminates in the battle at Manila Bay. The Spanish lose very quickly, and we then kind of take over the Philippines, and we'll talk about more about that in a few moments about what ends up happening with the Philippines. The second half of that strategy was the control of Cuba, and that culminates in this Battle of San Juan Hill, where Teddy Roosevelt is made a war hero as the leader of the cavalry unit, the Rough Riders. No Americans die in combat in this war. More end up actually dying because of disease like yellow fever, malaria, etc. And so that makes it kind of, people are really happy about this war. Again, it doesn't come over to America. It's very short, a little less than 3 months. And again, no Americans die directly because of combat. The end, this Emilio Aguinaldo is the gentleman. He'll come back up again in future lectures when we talk about imperialism, but he was the Filipino man that played a role in that insurrection against the Spanish in the Philippines. And here we have Teddy Roosevelt and his motley crew of Rough Riders. Again, future president right now. He's a younger man here, had served in the War Department, and then was inspired to go fight and joined up as part of the cavalry to come fight this war, because again, Americans were pretty excited about this war, and again, it was very short, and made him a war hero. So, impact of this: Treaty of Paris ends the war. We sign it the next year. Paris just happens to be a nice place to sign a treaty, thus the reason we have so many treaties of Paris, this one being the Treaty of 1899. The terms of that treaty, we get Cuba becomes a protectorate, not a territory, but a protectorate of America. We force them to add into their constitution what is known as the Platt Amendment. We'll go into more detail on that in a future lecture. But we have some limited intervention there. It also allows us to build Guantanamo Bay, where we house suspected terrorists today. More than that, we get, as you can see here, we control Puerto Rico, still to this day, becomes a territory. The Sandwich Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Guam, all territories that we still control today. And then the last term is that the Philippines, McKinley kind of considers it and ultimately decides that it's in the best interest of the Filipinos for us to help them. He didn't think they were smart enough to run themselves, so he annexes them. This means to take them in. They become a territory, but we actually pay for the Philippines. Cuba, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, we don't pay for. We just get as kind of the spoils of war. Philippines, we pay $20 million for. Not everyone is on board with this, and a bunch of people come together in these kind of loose leagues. They don't ever actually achieve anything, but you have here Mark Twain, Rudyard Kipling, who wrote the Jungle Book. They're in these leagues called the Anti-Imperialist League, and they think it's hypocritical for us to control these islands. They essentially have here the kind of greedy Uncle Sam taking in these territories, and they think that as a former colony that declared independence, that we should not then control colonies ourselves, that violates kind of the values, the core values of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and again makes us hypocrites. And it's kind of up to you to decide, were those leagues correct? Would you have aligned yourself with the leagues, or would you have aligned yourself with McKinley and some of the annexation of these territories? And that is it for this lecture.